What if history's most horrific crimes were answered not with justice, but with another bloodbath? Behind the story of the Allied victory in World War II lies a dark tragedy that was deliberately buried for decades, a chilling tale of merciless revenge, diplomatic betrayal, and 70,000 lives erased without ever seeing a courtroom. In April 1941, Nazi Germany launched a devastating surprise invasion of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. Without a formal declaration of war, the Luftwaffe bombed Belgrade in Operation Punishment, destroying much of the capital and killing thousands of civilians. Within just 11 days, Yugoslavia collapsed under the combined assault of German and Axis forces. The country was quickly partitioned, and the independent state of Croatia, NDH, was established as a fascist puppet regime under Ante Pavelić and the ultranationalist Ustaše movement. Backed by Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, the new regime immediately began implementing racist policies aimed at eliminating Serbs, Jews, and Romani communities through mass arrests, forced deportations, and systematic killings. The Ustaše's campaign of terror reached its peak at the Jasenovac concentration camp, where historians estimate that at least 80,000 people were murdered through starvation, forced labor, torture, and brutal executions. At the same time, Yugoslavia descended into a chaotic multi-sided civil war involving the Ustaše, the royalist Chetniks, the Slovene Home Guard, and Tito's communist partisans. As rival factions fought for power under the shadow of Nazi occupation, civilians became the primary victims of massacres, reprisals, and ethnic violence. By the end of World War II, the region had suffered immense devastation, leaving behind deep divisions and a legacy of hatred that would shape the Balkans for decades. The collapse of Nazi rule in 1945 did not bring immediate justice. Instead, it set the stage for another wave of bloodshed whose full story would remain hidden for generations. By May 1945, Nazi Germany was on the verge of total collapse, and the balance of power across the Balkans shifted dramatically. The Yugoslav Partisans, led by the communist commander Josip Broz Tito, had grown into a formidable force of nearly 800,000 troops and were now recognized by the Western Allies as the legitimate military force of Yugoslavia. As German armies retreated on every front, the partisans launched a series of rapid offensives to eliminate the remaining Axis forces and collaborationist regimes throughout the region. For the leaders of the independent state of Croatia, NDH, and their Ustaše militia, defeat no longer seemed avoidable. They knew that capture would almost certainly mean execution or harsh punishment for the atrocities committed during the war. Facing the collapse of their regime, Croatian officials, military commanders, and thousands of soldiers abandoned their positions and fled north toward the Austrian border in a desperate attempt to escape the advancing partisans. The retreat soon became one of the largest refugee columns in the final days of World War II. Hundreds of thousands of people, including Ustaše troops, members of the Slovene Home Guard, Chetnik units, German soldiers, government officials, and large numbers of civilians, joined the long procession moving toward Bleiburg, a small town near the Austrian border. Many civilians feared retaliation simply because they had lived under Axis-controlled territories, while others hoped the British Army would offer them protection under international law. The retreating forces deliberately mixed soldiers with women, children, and elderly refugees, making the distinction between combatants and civilians increasingly difficult. Their goal was to reach Carinthia, Austria, surrender to British forces, and avoid falling into the hands of Tito's partisans. Yet, as thousands struggled through crowded roads and mountain passes, many of the regime's highest-ranking leaders had already secured their own escape. Ante Pavelić, along with several senior Ustaše officials, fled through clandestine rat lines that eventually carried them to Western Europe and later to South America, abandoning tens of thousands of their soldiers and civilian followers to an uncertain fate. The refugees gathering near Bleiburg believed they were only hours away from safety. Instead, they were about to become central figures in one of the most controversial and tragic episodes of post-war European history. As tens of thousands of refugees and defeated soldiers gathered near the fields of Bleiburg in southern Austria, intense negotiations unfolded inside Bleiburg Castle. Representatives of the Croatian armed forces met with officers from Tito's Yugoslav Partisans and the British Army, hoping to secure a formal surrender to the Western Allies instead of the advancing communist forces. Many of those assembled believed that surrendering to the British would guarantee protection under the Geneva Conventions and a fair judicial process. During the negotiations, partisan representatives reportedly gave verbal assurances that prisoners would be treated humanely and that only individuals accused of war crimes would face trial. However, the fate of the refugees was influenced by broader military and political realities, rather than by promises made at the negotiating table. The British command, led in the area by General Sir Charles Keightley, faced overwhelming logistical and diplomatic challenges. British forces lacked the resources to feed, house, and guard the enormous number of soldiers and civilians seeking surrender. At the same time, London was determined to avoid a military confrontation with Tito's increasingly powerful partisans, who controlled much of the surrounding region and had been recognized by the Allies as Yugoslavia's legitimate military force. As a result, British authorities refused to accept the surrender of the retreating columns and ordered them to return across the border into Yugoslavia. In many cases, prisoners were reportedly told they were being transported to refugee camps in Italy or to areas under British protection, only to discover that they were instead being handed over to the partisans. For thousands of exhausted men, women, and children who believed they had finally reached safety, the forced repatriation marked the beginning of a far darker ordeal, one that would become one of the most disputed and controversial episodes in the aftermath of World War II. A persistent myth that emerged in the decades after the war claimed that the mass killings took place directly on the Bleiburg field itself. Modern historical research, however, indicates that while Bleiburg marked the point of surrender and forced repatriation, the largest massacres occurred only after the prisoners had been returned to Yugoslav territory. Once the columns were beyond the supervision of British forces, any expectation of humane treatment quickly disappeared. Instead, thousands of surrendered soldiers and civilians were forced onto what later became known as the death marches, or forced marches. They were driven across long distances with little or no food, water, or medical care. Exhaustion, starvation, and disease spread rapidly through the columns, while guards reportedly executed anyone who collapsed, attempted to escape, or simply fell behind. For many prisoners, survival depended not on guilt or innocence, but on whether they could physically endure the relentless marches. Upon reaching transit camps and remote execution sites, large-scale killings were carried out by Yugoslav security forces, particularly members of the OZNA, Department for the Protection of the People, the communist secret police. At Tesno, near Maribor in present-day Slovenia, historians estimate that around 15,000 victims were executed, many bound together with steel wire before being shot and buried in abandoned anti-tank trenches. Other notorious execution sites included Kočevski Rog, where prisoners were reportedly thrown into deep karst pits, and Huda Jama, an abandoned coal mine in present-day Slovenia. Investigations conducted decades later uncovered evidence that victims had been sealed behind concrete barriers inside the mine, with many believed to have been buried alive. These hidden mass graves remained concealed throughout the communist era, and only after the collapse of Yugoslavia did forensic investigations begin to reveal the true scale of the atrocities. Today, these sites stand as powerful reminders that the violence did not end with the defeat of Nazi Germany, but continued in the form of post-war reprisals that remain among the most controversial chapters in modern European history. The exact number of victims of the Bleiburg repatriations and subsequent killings has never been established with certainty. Many official records were destroyed, while others remained sealed for decades under the Yugoslav communist government, making a precise accounting impossible. Most modern historians estimate that between 60,000 and 70,000 people were killed during the post-war reprisals, although some estimates vary depending on the sources and the criteria used. The majority of the victims were Croats, followed by thousands of Slovenes, Serbs, and Montenegrins, including surrendered soldiers, collaborators, and civilians caught in the retreat. Under Josip Broz Tito's communist regime, discussion of the Bleiburg events and the subsequent death marches was effectively suppressed. Public debate, academic research, and media coverage were heavily restricted, leaving many mass graves undiscovered and many families without answers about the fate of their relatives. Following the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s, Bleiburg became one of the most politically contested memories of World War II in the Balkans. Croatian nationalist groups and émigré communities have at times cited significantly higher casualty figures, with critics arguing that such claims can be used to minimize or deflect attention from the crimes committed by the Ustaše regime. Conversely, some defenders of the former communist government have been accused of downplaying the scale of the post-war executions. Despite these competing narratives, a broad historical consensus acknowledges two essential facts. Many of those returned to Yugoslavia had served in collaborationist military formations or were associated with Axis-aligned regimes, yet the widespread executions carried out without individual trials or due process constituted a grave violation of human rights and the laws of war. Bleiburg therefore remains a powerful reminder that the end of World War II did not immediately bring justice to the Balkans. Instead, for tens of thousands of people, the victory over fascism was followed by another cycle of violence, whose legacy continues to shape historical memory and political debate across the region.